All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of our webinar series, The Cloud Pragmatist. This series is designed for cloud, networking, and security professionals because we all know that the cloud is transforming businesses out there, but it's also going through its own transformation. It's evolving quickly. The goals of this series is to really keep you up to date with what's happening with cloud networking and security trends, challenges that you might face, and solutions to those challenges. And this will help you in your cloud journey. I'm Rod Stuhmuller, and I'm the Vice President of Strategic Customer and Analyst Relations at Aviatrix. And today I'm joined by Brad Casemore. Brad is Vice President of Data Center and Multicloud Networking at IDC. Brad and I have been industry veterans for quite a number of years, having each of us been, part of businesses and technologies that have defined our industry for the last 2 decades. Okay, maybe the last 3 decades, but really who's counting, right? Brad covers a broad range of data center cloud related technologies, including hybrid and multi-cloud network software, enterprise computing, applications, network security, and even mobile and wireless technologies. So he's really got a broad experience about all the things that are going on that are affecting how things are evolving in the industry. So Brad, welcome to the Cloud Pragmatist.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rod. As far as how far back we go, we don't go as far back as the telegraph, but certainly to some of the earlier networking technologies. And it's great to see it evolve as much as it has. And we're talking about a fascinating topic today. So thank you.
So today we're going to focus on a couple of different things. Really the strategic approach about building network architectures across multiple clouds. Specifically, we'll be talking about 3 areas. One, we're going to talk about how to plan for streamlined day 2 operations, which in my mind is really powerful because we see a lot of people, concerned with spinning stuff up, but they fail to see what happens after that. We're going to look at some of the most effective strategies for achieving visibility and control in these multi-cloud environments, and how to build a multi-cloud architecture that mitigates skills gaps that we see happening in a lot of customers. We'll also be taking an audience poll. In fact, when it comes up, please respond to this because I think it's going to give us a lot of good information, and we'll put the results up so everybody can see that. So participate in the poll when that gets put up. We'll also be allowing questions to come in and be submitted in the Q&A section, or is it the Q&A? Yeah, in the Q&A section. So please, as we go through, if you have questions, ask those. We have some people in the background that'll maybe try to answer your questions directly in the Q&A section, but we'll also bring some of those up at the end of the seminar if we have time for some Q&A. So, let's get started. Brad, why don't you kick us off with some of the IDC research results that you've recently compiled around today's topic?
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Rod. We'll take you through some data from some surveys that IDC has conducted in the past little while. Most of this is relatively fresh data, so I think you'll find it interesting. We did a survey. One thing that we wanted to ask about was multi-cloud itself and multi-cloud strategies as pursued by enterprises. And we asked the question as part of a Cloud Pulse survey, which is a regularly conducted IDC survey. And this one, as you'll see, wasn't that long ago. It was conducted in October 2021. And we asked specifically about how enterprises, as they looked ahead over the next 2 years, how they would describe their organization's use of different on-premises and off-premises cloud environments. And you can see that less than a quarter answered that they would focus on a single cloud environment. The rest had some permutation of hybrid multi-cloud. And you can see that 31%, for instance, said they'd have multiple cloud environments to migrate workloads and data between. So, fairly ambitious in that regard. Slightly smaller percentage said they would have multiple cloud environments with little to no interoperability between them. So, a little less ambitious, but still multi-cloud. And then you can see that 16% said we'll have multiple cloud environments where a single application can run seamlessly across different clouds. Now that's a truly distributed cloud application where you're running it across clouds. And of course, the degree of complexity goes up significantly when you're talking about that sort of cloud environment for an application. So Rod, I think the takeaway here is that organizations, except for 24% of them, are really focusing on permutations of multi-cloud. And
yeah, I agree. And this is exactly what we see.
More aggressive over time. Absolutely.
This is exactly what we see out there. And that last question specifically, I think a lot of people thought at one point in time there was going to be this strategy of arbitraging cost across clouds by having an application and being able to move it from here to there. I think the reality is more that just some applications run better in one cloud than the other, and that's where they reside. And so the multi-cloud aspect of it is more of an infrastructure advantage, meaning the infrastructure team can manage the underlying cloud infrastructure across multiple clouds, but the applications just run where they run best.
Yeah, and that's a great point. On our next slide, you touched on the why, and we're looking at the why right here, right? We asked, and this was part of a different IDC survey, which is called the IaaS view, looking at the use of IaaS by enterprises. And it was conducted just a few months ago, again, September 2021. And we asked about the reasons that is driving the use of multiple IaaS clouds at enterprises. And the question specifically was, we use different IaaS providers because we have, and they could select up to 2 of these. Now you'll notice from the percentages, the first thing I want to point out is that this is well over 100%. What does that tell you? It tells you 2 things. There are many reasons for adopting multi-cloud, and many of them are not mutually exclusive, right? As to Rod's point earlier. And you can see that at the top is a mix of different applications or use cases suited to different public cloud IaaS providers. To your point, Rod, they're looking to put the application where they feel it will generate the best outcomes and the best benefit for their businesses. Yep. And that was right up top. You can see there's a bit of a delta down to specific guidance and direction to use multiple IaaS providers to mitigate risk of vendor lock-in. It wasn't number 1 though, right? It was number 2. Of course, you want that flexibility, you want that dexterity, you want that adaptability in a cloud world. And organizations, they could select the first one and the second one. These are not mutually exclusive. You can see they started with one IaaS provider, but expanded to others due to architectural reasons, right? And I think this is a natural continuum for organizations. They start in one cloud and then move to others as they get more confident, or they have business reasons and architectural reasons for moving to other clouds. And you can see that another one is, of course, specific features only available via one particular cloud. And that's similar to the first point, right? They're looking to ensure that the applications and the workloads can run in an optimal environment, right? To produce the business results and outcomes that are strategic for their organizations. Another one, of course, is different teams or departments having selected different IaaS providers. Another aspect of that, Rod, and we see it come up, is what happens when you have M&A, right? So it's not just within an organization organically. You have M&A, and all of a sudden you've got multiple clouds, right? Yeah. And you have to deal with that, and it's a reality for many organizations. And of course, that arbitrage is the last one, right? Gaining pricing and negotiation leverage with each provider. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually something we see is very interesting. And I think a lot of people, especially IT folks that are in the cloud, need to understand that, the business is making these decisions, and they may not even be in the room when the decision gets made to make that acquisition or to need some new application that's going to run better in a different cloud. So the days of IT making the decision that we are in this cloud and this cloud only, I think are over. Business is driving it other needs.
Yeah, that's right, Rod, absolutely. It's now a top-down strategy guided flow, right? Where, structure and infrastructure must follow strategy, right?
Yeah.
Rather than the bottom up. So I totally agree. And in our next slide, we're going to look at how organizations are addressing multi-cloud networking. So we've got the fact that organizations, as I showed you on the previous slides, they're going multi-cloud. We now know the reasons. And how are they adapting the network for this more complex multi-cloud landscape? Well, many are starting, we see many organizations that start out with a DIY approach, right? And they're using routers and vRouters and of course, VPNs, et cetera, and their own infrastructure automation tools, often leveraging open source, right? And some of them are using scripting, but they're doing it themselves. Many find over time that this is highly complex and leads to configuration drift. It leads to a number of issues, right? They don't have the visibility they need into clouds. And of course it's costly, right? I mean, nothing is free. Even open source is not free. You start using it, and there's a cost associated with it. There's an operational cost, and the degree of complexity can really grow. Some are leveraging for part of their needs interconnection-oriented architectures. Think of the colocation providers such as Equinix, Digital Realty, CoreSite, and that's good, right? That's certainly part of the solution, but there's more to it than that. You still have to have a policy overlay. You still have to bring intelligence and automation to bear across all these environments. Some are adding to their SDN platforms. They're looking for extensions from the vendors. Now, not everybody has an SDN platform, right? So that's the first thing, a data center SDN platform. But those that do are trying to determine whether they can use extensions to those platforms to address their issues. Some, as we saw earlier, in those who are only going with one cloud because of the complexity, that minority now that's going that route, are doing nothing, assuming it's too difficult to deploy and maintain, right? They're intimidated by this. So they're using one cloud instead of multi-cloud, and they still have applications, primarily, in many cases, in an on-premises data center, some SaaS and a little bit of IaaS. Some are making, we call these the incrementalists. They're doing piecemeal, discrete efforts, kind of ad hoc, right? And it's probably not the best way to go about it. You want to use foresight when you're doing these sorts of things. But this is the situation some find themselves in. And we have some who are looking at this in a, I would say, a more comprehensive way, in a more holistic way, who are looking at adoption of purpose-built multi-cloud networking and security platforms, right? And they're looking at how they can support native cloud constructs. And of course, they're all different, right? They've all got their own APIs, network constructs, network insertion models, et cetera, while simplifying consistent network policies. And that's that policy model like I alluded to earlier, right? Bringing some intelligence and intelligent automation to this. So this is the landscape we see today. It is evolving, of course, but organizations are coming at this from various perspectives, Rod.
Yeah, and I agree. We see a lot of that. And of course, the last bullet point there is kind of about what we do, Aviatrix. But I want to make a couple of points on what you say here. For instance, the interconnection. One thing for people to be careful about is the use of multi-cloud networking out there is being used by a lot of different vendors. But for instance, that second point, that is connecting to multiple clouds. It's not actually doing consistent networking in and across the clouds. So just be careful as you hear people talking about that term multi-cloud network, what you're doing. You want to go beyond stopping at the edge and passing you on to the native constructs that are different in every one of the clouds. So that's a big thing. And then the DIY, we absolutely see a lot of that, but we find and see a lot get to that point that you described where it becomes too complex. They find the limitations. And then when they're introduced to Aviatrix, they're like, wow, where have you been? We've needed this for a long time. So keep those kind of things in mind. But I think we see all of this out there, Brad.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks, Rod. And I think on the next slide, I just want to talk about how we see multi-network. So we talked about where organizations are. Of course, we went why they're going multi-cloud, what some of the reasons were. And now we're looking at what you should think about as you look at your multi-cloud networking requirements. We think at IDC that multi-cloud networking should support distributed enterprise workloads, whether they're discrete or whether they are inherently distributed. And we saw in that earlier slide, organizations are at various aspects of their own multi-cloud posture, but it should support these workloads across clouds, right? It should support them across all the major IaaS clouds. Should be declaratively managed. It should be on demand. It should be elastically scalable, highly available, and secure. You'll notice that each one of those is an attribute of cloud native, right? Of the cloud environments. It should not be like a sort of rigid, static infrastructure from the client server world. It has to be like the cloud. It should include abstractions that simplify networking to and across these clouds, because it has to be simple. Complexity is the enemy of agility. You need to simplify this, but at the same time, make it consistent and make it performant across these environments. Multi-cloud networking should deliver operational agility and efficiencies. And it needs to do that through visibility and actionable insights. And I think this is a point we're going to discuss, Rod, is that it can't just be a day 0-1 capability. It needs to be day 2 and day N. Day 2, of course, is when you're going through your day-to-day, troubleshooting and remediation, because these are highly complex environments. Distributed environments are inherently complex, and there's no question as you're using multiple clouds, you're dealing with all these different APIs, network constructs, and et cetera. These are complex environments, and you need visibility, because day 2 is the rest of your life, right? It's after you've got it up and running, you've got to be able to keep it up and running, and you've got to be able to optimize that environment. And the visibility confers and facilitates faster troubleshooting and remediation of network issues that can affect the performance of your applications, of your cloud applications, and the experience of your users. And this also helps you through visibility move to a more proactive IT model that we think is congruous with cloud, right? It aligns with cloud. You want to move to a model where you are able to anticipate potential issues and preclude them, rather than constantly firefighting and basically acting in a reactive way to keep services online after they've been disrupted. And you want to provide all of this, should provide, and Rod, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about because we mentioned earlier how long we've been in networking. This is a great opportunity for the network to really contribute to the business, to go from being that, traditional eternal cost center, right? And sort of the bugbear of the organization, to being a direct contributor to business outcomes and to the business results that the organization wants to achieve. And this is what we think you need to do in order to provide a true multi-cloud network.
Yeah, I agree. And to your last point, yeah, I think we're actually getting to the point where we're going to have that programmable infrastructure that the application can say, hey, here's what I need, and it gets it. We've always talked about that, and we've never quite gotten there because there was always some human element of configuration in there that just kind of broke the model. And I think we may be getting closer to that. Another point.
Absolutely, and that's where the automation, it can't just be, we'll call it discrete or partial automation. It needs to be intelligent, right, throughout this whole network life cycle. Absolutely, yeah.
That's right, and it's a multi-tier chess game, right? It's not a decisions that can be made quickly by humans. This is where the compute comes into play, and we start being able to do things in a very automated way. It's great. And one point I'd like to make, because I think you brought it out here, that we hear a lot, the people that have gone further in cloud and really have adopted the cloud operational model, if you will. I think this is a point we hear. Sometimes early people in the cloud see things like what Aviatrix is doing, and they say, hey, can you bring that and do that on-prem? And the answer is no. This is built for the cloud. The cloud has a different operational model. The people who have been in cloud and adopted that operational model even more actually are thinking they still want capabilities on-prem, but they see the operational model moving back from the cloud into on-prem. and then having the ability to treat on-prem almost like it's a VPC or a VNet, that's managed like the cloud at the edge. So I think there's some really exciting things that are going to evolve over the next couple of years.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rod. And just from an IDC perspective, we have a program, we call it the Future of Digital Infrastructure. And that point you raised is exactly what we explore there. The operational implications of cloud everywhere, becoming ubiquitous into the on-premises environments, edges, branches, everywhere. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's right. I'm interested in that research. I'll definitely tune in and hear what you guys are talking about there. All right, let's see. I think next slide coming up here. Okay, yeah, and right now I think we're going to pop up a poll. Yeah, here it is. So please spend the next couple of minutes as I introduce the next section to kind of go through and answer the poll, and then a little bit later on in the presentation we'll go through the results of the poll.
And as you see, Rod, we've been disenfranchised. We can't vote. It's only the audience who can.
That's right. Yeah, I was trying to. All right, well, let's drill in a little bit in this next section and talk a little bit about planning for those day two operations, right? Early on, many of the enterprise, I think I mentioned this in the beginning, really thought about cloud in terms of moving quickly. The DevOps teams were really going around the traditional IT just because they had the ability to move faster on their own, and traditional IT was getting in the way and slowing things down. But a lot of times that was focused on just spinning up the environment. Maybe even if it was testing QA, they spun it up, tore it down, spun it up, tore it down. And that was really, all you needed. But now as kind of full enterprise infrastructure and applications are being deployed in the cloud and remaining up and working for a long time, day two operations, becomes something that I think a lot of people need, because, day one, you spin it up and it's up. Day two is the rest of your life. And like anything else, you want the rest of your life to be less complicated. And so having those day two operations in place is important. So I kind of ask you, what kind of experiences have you heard from customers around day two operations, and maybe can you share some examples of the type of questions you get from those deployments, and then maybe we can share some ideas with the audience here.
Yeah, absolutely. What we found, Rod, is that as I said earlier on that earlier slide, some folks have taken a DIY approach, right, and they've become their own integrator, in effect, right? They've used some open source, they've used some tools that they had from the legacy world, and they've tried to do this on their own, and they can get started in many cases. But to your point, as they deal with day two, and they deal with a very different, multi-cloud environment. First of all, cloud is different from, traditional on-premises tools and operational models, as you said. They find that they don't have the visibility they need to be able to assess and remediate issues that do arise. And of course they do arise. This is a complex environment, right? So they have some traditional tooling, and that doesn't really, and even when they've tried to use open source, they find that they don't necessarily have, for instance, topology views. They don't have flow-based views. They don't really understand what is affecting, for instance, latency or availability inside, let's say, an availability zone, a region, never mind cross clouds. And they feel that basically they learn very quickly that they don't have comprehensive tooling for those day two issues that arise, right? Especially around remediation, especially around seeing anomalous flows and understanding source and destination, for instance, and obviating potential security issues, which is another thing that comes up all the time. So there are a whole range of network and security issues where a lot of the tooling that they have just isn't aligned with the cloud, these distributed cloud environments that they've gotten into. And I think it's really important to be able to check that list, because as you said, First of all, it's a complex environment. Things can and will go wrong, and you want to be in a position to detect them and remediate them at the earliest possible point, and to potentially be in a move toward, as I said earlier, I would say a more proactive posture that allows you to obviate these things before they happen, right? And often they find the tooling just isn't up to the requirements for these day two challenges.
Yeah, we see that a lot. And actually, you made two good points there that I want to drill into a little bit. One was a lot about visibility, and we'll come back to that. But I think really importantly, what we hear a lot is security. Because in the cloud, security, you have to take a different approach, right? I mean, we have a feature that's added into our Copilot called Threat IQ that, it basically takes advantage of the fact that our multi-cloud data plane sees every packet, right? So it has the ability to say, let's look at the source and destination address and compare it to a database of malicious IPs from somebody like Proofpoint, right? And this all of a sudden shows all of these communications to malicious IPs that aren't being seen by the current investments in security that are traditional. But that's well understandable because a lot of those traditional security appliances are sort of from the data center age, where you basically had everything in the data center and you forced everything through inspection points so you could look at everything that was going across. The cloud's different, right? You've got things coming in from all different directions, going out from all different directions. Almost impossible to put a inspection point that's going to see everything. So having this multi-cloud network backbone that does see everything is a really good augmentation to the existing investments. Does that make sense to you?
It does, right? And I think, as you said, it's not only is it a highly distributed environment, and of course the network has to be able to be ubiquitous within that environment, right? Support the workloads, and of course the consumption of those workloads wherever they are, right? It's a big network canvas, but it's very dynamic, to your point, Rod,
Yep.
right? And it has to be. That's what cloud is, right? It has to be dynamic.
Exactly.
And it's an unprecedented challenge. And I think that's why organizations find inevitably that traditional tooling and operational models just fall short of the objectives. Absolutely.
Yeah, and then coming back to visibility, and you made some points about being able to troubleshoot quickly, being able to have the things that the network guys are used to, things like being able to do packet capture and ping and traceroute, which are possible in the cloud, but it's actually pretty difficult. And doing things like consolidating a bunch of the information. We hear a lot from customers that, to do something that we do in an app called App IQ, the information we put in App IQ would take 13 different AWS console windows to bring up, and then do a lot of human correlation in between that. So it really shows the gap between, doing it kind of the cloud way and doing it with native constructs.
Absolutely. But, it's interesting what you said. Many organizations, depending on their resources and their skill sets internally, they understand that they have to get to this cloud model, right? And this cloud-centric operational model with cloud-centric tooling. But it's great that they can find a way there, kind of understand the limits of their traditional tools within these environments and gradually make that transition. So we actually see quite a bit of that happen within the installed base. Yeah,
that's great, and I agree. And that allows us. Let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about that skills gap, right? Because you've got a lot of people. I'd say 60% of our customers are in a single cloud today, but they know they're going to go to multi-cloud, and they want to put in architecture and a way to do things that they don't have to go hire. Let's say they have AWS experts. They don't want to have to go find Azure experts and Google experts and so forth. So they want to look at a way to, to eliminate that skills gap. Do you see that out there as well?
Absolutely. And as you know, there are teams that may understand the network constructs and of course, the various services within, for instance, an AWS or an Azure. But finding them across these environments, all of a sudden there's a huge delta. And of course, the cost for those professionals goes way up. So they're at a premium and they're also scarce, right? And that the two often go together. So this is a huge challenge for organizations, and this is why what we find is that they are looking to vendors to simplify this for them, to make it consistent, to basically consolidate it, right? So that they can meet the technology where their teams are now, right? And this can also help their teams learn as they go forward. But yeah, you're right. In fact, we hear it all the time. Organizations say, I just don't have the skill sets I need to be able to understand all of the cloud APIs, network constructs, insertion models, the new services they introduce, each cloud.
All the time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of learning. And I do think most enterprises we see are looking for help in that regard.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, we've gotten a lot of great feedback on what we call ACE training, which is Aviatrix Certified Engineer. And it was interesting before the pandemic, we were doing this, in hotel rooms and training rooms of 10 people. And then the pandemic forced us to go online. And now we have 17,000 people who have gone through the first level of ACE training. And we get a lot of good feedback because it talks about each one of the clouds and how you do networking in each one of the clouds. And it's different than the way the cloud providers themselves would teach you. Because what happens if you go to an AWS networking class, they're going to tell you that they have everything and anything you'll ever need, and you don't need to know about anything else. And then they don't tell you about the gotchas. They don't tell you about the limitations. They don't tell you about the challenges you're going to have when you go multi-region and they don't even use the word multi-cloud, right? And this is the same from all of the cloud providers. So this training has been really good for people who especially have some networking background, but maybe they don't have the cloud background. So now this is bringing those network expertise guys into the cloud, which is really the progression of their career. So it's a good way for people, if you haven't done this, I would recommend to the audience. It's a 4-hour, online self-paced class that I think will help you really get up to speed in a lot of areas.
It's an area where there is, we of course had all the certification programs of the previous era, and I do think there's a real hunger out there in the community to understand these sort of cross-cloud, ecumenical, or basically more multi-cloud skill sets, right, for connectivity, for networking, for policy, et cetera, abstractions. There's a real hunger to learn about that because it's a reality for almost every, as we saw earlier from the earlier slide, this is a reality for organizations.
Yeah. And
they're looking to their teams to be able to facilitate this by providing the tactics and the infrastructure that supports strategy. So
yeah, let's talk a little bit. I think you showed this in one of your slides, and we even brought it up a little bit because, I think a lot of people, and this is really for the people in the audience here who are thinking, well, I'll decide when I need to go multi-cloud and, that sort of thing. And we've seen it many times. And one of the biggest reasons is for a merger and acquisition. They had planned on being one cloud, and then all of a sudden their business is acquiring another company that's in another cloud, and all of a sudden they are expected to deal with that quickly. So have you seen that happen? I mean, obviously you got some response from your customers. Have you had to talk with people about how they're going to deal with a merger and acquisition?
Yeah, obviously sometimes, and I think you mentioned this, Rod, organizations still aren't looking at this proactively. Obviously, part of it is an organizational thing, right? Is At what point do you tell your net ops, your architects, et cetera, that there's an acquisition going down and they should prepare for it? Usually it's still very late in the process, right?
Yeah.
After the fact, and they have to scramble. So I think, obviously this is perhaps something that's very new for the audience out there, but acquisitions, it looks like we're heading into a period where M&As are going to happen for many reasons. You see a valuable, potentially distressed asset, your organization sees this and they want to acquire it. You're strategically moving into new markets, new services, and you're acquiring from a position of strength, right? And we're seeing all sorts of M&As occur across industries. And I think the part of getting into this cloud mindset is to think about your adaptability and your flexibility of your infrastructure, including your network infrastructure. And you should assume that if you're in an organization that's growing, that M&As certainly are possible and maybe probable. And you should get into as much of a proactive stance as you can. So when it happens, you've got answers, right? Yeah. And you can say to the business, I was prepared for this. And, we have a foundation that allows us to, it's a flexible fulcrum, right? And we can basically pivot with the organization. It's not to say there won't be any work involved. There's always additional work, but you're in a much better position than having to scramble and reinvent the wheel, which is what we see, unfortunately, far too often.
Yeah, and that really comes down to architecture, right? It's, have you chosen to build your architecture that binds you into a single cloud using those constructs? Or are you building an architecture that gives you some benefit over the single cloud anyway, but also puts in an architecture that allows you to extend that into multiple clouds whenever that time comes? And it's almost inevitable that it is going to come. It's just when for each company.
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's see. Let's look and see where we are in the agenda here. Why don't we take some? Everybody's seeing the results of the poll there. So
I was looking at those. You have it's a fairly, I would say, an audience that's been thinking about this for a while and has made some movement, right? I mean, we have a very small percentage that are doing nothing, which is good to hear, right?
Yeah.
They're not put off by the challenge, which is great. And just a small number that are using just one cloud instead of multi-cloud as well. It's slightly higher than the do nothing crowd, but only slightly higher. Most are looking at this and trying to find a way forward. So it's great to see an audience that is grappling with the problem, Rod.
Yeah, I think that's it's really encouraging and good that we have this topic, and hope everybody's learning a little bit as we go through. To that point, let's open it up to maybe some questions. If let's see, if Ricardo, have there been some questions that come across that maybe we should share with everybody and have Brad and I address?
Yes, Rod, there are a few great questions here. Let me pick a few of those and share with you. So one is how to deal with our skills gap as we add additional clouds to our network.
Okay, that's a great question, and we see a lot of people dealing with that. I think, as I mentioned, we have some great training that can help your team understand the different environments and do that in a very easy way. And I mentioned the associate course, which is a 4-hour self-paced, you get a certification and everything out of it. But then we have multiple layers of that to get your skills all the way up. There's a professional one, which is actually a 3-day class. We have classes that are around operations, some about infrastructure as code. So there's several different levels of this training that will help get your teams up to speed, not only on Aviatrix, but what is going on with networking in each one of these clouds, and giving you the real story about what they can and can't do with the native constructs. And then, of course, a little bit about the benefits of how Aviatrix can help you as you move forward. So we also have honestly, some of the most talented people I've ever worked with in the industry our solution architects and people like that. So I would say engage your local teams. These guys are willing to come out, go on a Zoom, whatever needed, and really help you understand what needs to happen to build the architecture that's going to take you forward and give you that skills that you need.
Yeah, I'd say
anything
that,
else you've seen out there, Brad, that you would suggest people take a look at?
I would say, as I mentioned earlier, assume that your organization, because as we saw, your organization does want that sort of cloud dexterity and flexibility. Assume that you have to have an adaptable networking capability across clouds, and look for, tools, platforms, technologies that will help you get there in a consistent way, so that you don't have to master all of these disparate sets of APIs and network constructs across each cloud, right? So that you've got a platform that allows you to be have an extensible network across this multi-cloud fabric. And I think it's really important to get in a position to be flexible from the outset. Again, I think you folks saw the numbers at the start. There's a good chance, and you're on this, you're tuning into us today, so the assumption is that you are going multi-cloud and you understand the strategic direction of your organization. And you have to provide that kind of flexible networking framework that allows your company and your organization to get there. And it's really important to think about as much of this at the outset. I'm not saying anybody has, perfect foresight, but there are certain things that you can assume to be true and you can act on them.
Absolutely. Great advice. What other questions, Carlo?
There is one here that is very, actually, two questions in a single one. So how secure are multi-cloud networks, and how can Aviatrix make them more secure?
Great question. Yeah, no, security is important to everybody. It's top of mind, right? And companies spend a lot of money on security. The cloud is actually a different beast from a security standpoint, right? Because so many things can come in and out from different areas. So like, for instance, in Azure, when you spin up a VNet, it by default has a connection to the external public internet, right? And you have to actually turn that off if it's not going to be there. And so many DevOps teams and so forth, maybe they're just spinning it up for, they think this is just a QA thing they're going to do and they're going to take it down. You would be surprised how quickly somebody in Russia is scanning and finding that open port and moving something onto that machine. And this is exactly the kinds of things that we do with Threat IQ, taking advantage of that data plane that sees everything. We're going to see that connection to a malicious IP right away. And we're doing even more things that take advantage of that all-seeing data plane, like being able to do anomaly detection or baselining an application environment for a couple of weeks and then being able to look for deviations from that norm. So let's say I find new ports and protocols being used. Well, that could be perfectly normal. It could be the application team added something, but it could also, and more likely, be malicious code that's moving laterally in your cloud using kind of obscure ports and protocols that people wouldn't normally be monitoring. And because it has to go across the data plane, you'll actually see it. Now, I'm not saying it's time to, rip out your firewalls and do anything like that, but it is augmenting, it's actually complementing the investments that you already have in other security solutions for the cloud that are probably making you very comfortable because they're using the same policies that you used for on-prem. A lot of people do that, bring their next generation firewall capabilities into the cloud and so forth. But these are all single point of inspection. And if the traffic's not flowing through that inspection point, you're not going to see it. So you need to, our multi-cloud solution really does help you augment, your security in the cloud. Brad,
yeah, Rod, it's a great point you made about those IP address squatters. We're seeing a lot more of that, right? They see an unsecured IP address and they hop on it. An interesting thing is, in the era of cloud, where does the network end and security begin? Well, the two are coming together in a big way, right? The network should provide security, right? And you need to look at that. And another aspect of that, Rod touched on it, is the clear definition we used to have between north-south traffic and east-west traffic. Those lines are blurred when you're looking at a multi-cloud environment. There's a lot of east-west traffic, really, when you think about it. And those lateral exploits, you need to be able to guard against them. And I think the network, with the proper policies and segmentation, can do a lot to mitigate those threats. So
yeah, and that's a great point, Brad. I mean, if I look back in our history, I remember thinking, yeah, wow, the router is gonna. I had a colleague of mine who was leaving to go to this new startup called Checkpoint, and I said, well, that's stupid. Routers are going to do that, right? But it turned out that, the networking guys were focused on feeds and speeds. The router guys were new protocols and being able to process packets faster and all of that. They allowed this bolt-on security market to evolve because it was added on to the network. The network didn't do the security. In the cloud, I think we're getting to a point where the processing power and the capabilities of being the data plane are going to change that model in the cloud. So anyway, just something to think about.
So Rod, you were one of those who told that joke about a firewall is just a misconfigured router.
That's right. That's how I thought, but you see what happened. So I've been wrong many times in terms of where I should have gone in my career.
Yeah.
Okay, any more questions there, Ricardo? We got a few more minutes of time, I think.
Oh, there are there are a lot. Let me pick.
All right, any good one that you want to, the last question you want to bring up to everybody?
Yeah, so I think that's a good one. So any tip, advices on how to get started in a multi-cloud environment?
Yeah, in a multi-cloud environment, certainly, as I mentioned, some of the training that we do, being able to try what we do and see how it works is really easy, right? This isn't like data center technology where you have to buy a box and you do this and that. This is software that you download out of the marketplace, you spin it up. We have even something that Terraform modules that'll spin up a multi-cloud environment for you. You'll try things, get used to it, and you can build it in an afternoon, tear it down, try it. It's like 23 cents an hour. So it's billed through the meter through your AWS marketplace or your Azure marketplace. So very, very easy to try. And we have teams that can hold your hand, walk you through that, and let you play with it all you want. So I say just try it, get going and learn about it.
Okay, great. Thanks.
All right, well, let's see. This is probably about all the time that we have today. Hopefully you found the conversation valuable. Keep an eye out for some emails. We usually follow up with everybody. Notice that a post survey. So we love to get your feedback about the presentation here today and how we did. We'll be discussing strategies for, cloud networking skills gap in the next one. So you can see on May 25th at 9 a.m. Pacific time, we'll be going through a little more detail on these skills gaps and how you can address the skills gap issues. So we look forward to seeing you on that. Brad, really, thanks for joining us. It was a pleasure, as always, talking things out with you, and I really appreciate you joining.
Yeah, thanks, Rod. It was fun for me, and I hope it was informative for the audience. Thanks very much.
And then finally, if you guys want to learn more, there's some ways to learn, join the Cloud Pragmatist webinar series to find a little bit more. You can get into these hands-on workshops we call Build. So if you want somebody to help you and walk you through in a couple-hour session, we do these pretty regularly. And also you can see with the barcode here, if you want to schedule a 30-minute session with one of our cloud architects, maybe drill into a little bit more detail about what your application environment looks like and how you might go about, moving into multi-cloud, we can certainly help you there. And then of course, I mentioned a few times the ACE multi-cloud networking certification. If you go to aviatrix.com/ACE, you have all the information about how to do that and get involved. So we'll leave that up for a little while in case you guys want to grab the barcode. But I really appreciate everybody being on the call today.